In the criminal underworld, violence and murder are at the crux of power wielded by organized crime. These criminal organizations have multiple members who are willing and able to commit murder whenever it is deemed necessary. However, there are some men who become so skilled at the job of murder that their crimes become legendary. These killers are calculating, prolific, efficient, and know how to send a message. These killers are organized crime's top hitmen. Number 6. Giuseppe Scarpuzzedda Greco. Giuseppe Greco was born on January 4th, 1952 in Sicily, an outlying town in the province of Palermo, Sicily. Though little is known about his childhood, what is known is that he was raised by his mafia-entrenched family on an estate just outside of the town. Giuseppe's father, Nicola Greco, was a mafia soldier in the Greco clan, and Giuseppe was schooled in mafia rules and traditions from an early age. His father, Nicola, nicknamed Scarpa, which translates to shoe in Italian, worked for the boss of Sicily, Salvatore Greco. It was due to his father's nickname of Scarpa that the young Giuseppe was given his own nickname, Scarpuzzedda, or Little Shoe, though those close to him affectionately referred to him as Pino. Many sources claim that boss Salvatore Greco was not related to Giuseppe and his father. However, there are others that claim they are distantly related. These sources also claim that Giuseppe may have also been related to Croce Verde Giardini clan boss, Michele Greco, giving him the proper pedigree to rise quickly within the ranks of the Sicilian mafia. In school, Giuseppe, or Pino as he was known as a child, made good marks and was well liked by teachers and classmates alike. It is said that he especially excelled in Latin and Greek. Along with his father, many members of his extended family belonged to the mafia. While this may have made his path to mafia induction quicker, it also made the path nearly impossible to deviate from. Giuseppe Greco was to be a mafioso, and that was that. It is alleged that Greco was inducted into the mafia at a very young age, and would start out as a driver for Tommaso Spadaro, the powerful boss of Mandamento Tribunali, which was also known as Calza. Working for Spadaro, he would soon befriend his nephew and fellow mafioso, Giuseppe Lucchesi. Being that both young men had similar backgrounds and were also raised in the rules and traditions of La Cosa Nostra, the two had a lot in common and would grow extremely close over the years. It was Lucchesi who would be there during the final moments of Greco's life. As Giuseppe Greco came of age in the Sicilian underworld, a number of Machiavellian chess moves and cold-blooded power plays set the stage for one of the most violent periods in the history of the Sicilian Mafia. Some would refer to this period as the Second Mafia War, and it would make Giuseppe Greco an underworld legend. The instigators of the Second Mafia War were the Corleonesi, although they were helped by a number of other mafia families. The Corleonesi were the mafia family from the town of Corleone, and were led by Luciano Ligo and his top lieutenants, Salvatore Toto Rina and Bernardo Provenzano. Because they hailed from a small rural town, the Corleonesi were often referred to as the peasants, or I Vidani in Sicilian, by other mafia families, especially by the powerful urbanized bosses in the capital of Palermo. Things began to change in the 1960s as the Corleonesi grew in power and prestige under the leadership of the brutal and ambitious Luciano Ligo, who would become the mafia boss of Corleone via the crude but effective method of simply shooting the old boss, Michele Navarra. During the 1970s, the mafia in Sicily resumed its normal illicit businesses after the mafia trials of the 1960s had ended with few convictions. The Corleonesi's primary rivals were Stefano Bontade, Salvatore Inzerio, and Gaetano Badalamenti, who were all bosses of various powerful Palermo mafia families. The Sicilian Mafia Commission would be re-established in 1970, with Bontade and Badalamenti holding two of its seats. A third was held by Ligo, though he was represented by Salvatore Rina, as Ligo was on the run from law enforcement and hiding on the Italian mainland. When Ligo was captured in 1974 and imprisoned for murder, Rina took over as boss of the Corleonesi, with Bernardo Provenzano as his second in command. The Corleonesi began to win over allies amongst the other mafia families. Some of the bosses who aligned themselves with the Corleonesi were Palermo bosses Giuseppe Callo of Porta Nuova, Filippo Marchesi of Corso de Mille, and Rosario Riccobono of Partana Mondello. A mafioso named Giuseppe Di Cristina saw the brazen machinations of the Corleonesi bosses Salvatore Rina and Bernardo Provenzano. Rina and Provenzano violated a number of Cosa Nostra rules, such as ordering murders without the consent of the commission. While the more established mafia families in Palermo refrained from openly killing authorities because it would attract too much police attention, the Corleonesi deliberately killed to intimidate the authorities in such a way that the suspicion would fall on their rivals in the commission. Di Cristina would warn others on the commission against the growing power of the Corleonesi faction. In order to weaken Di Cristina, Rina and Provenzano would order the murder of one of his closest allies, Lieutenant Colonel Giuseppe Russo. Rina and Provenzano would hand the contract to Michele Greco, who would then pass it along to Giuseppe Pino Greco and Leo Luca Bagarella. This was one of Greco's earliest murder contracts, and it would end up being one of his most important. On August 20th, 1977, Carabinieri Lieutenant Colonel Giuseppe Russo and his friend Filippo Costa were killed. Di Cristina became more and more isolated after their murder. He decided to inform the Carabinieri about the dangers of the Corleonesi. The first meeting took place on April 16, 1978. According to the Carabinieri officer who met with him, Di Cristina looked like a hunted animal. Di Cristina would go on to give a full picture of the internal division within Cosa Nostra between the Corleonesi-led faction of Luciano Leggio and the faction of Gaetano Badalamenti and Stefano Bontade. The Corleonesi also had a secret hit squad of 14 men, which was led by none other than Giuseppe Greco. This squad would also include Giuseppe Lucchesi, Mario Prestefilippo, and Giuseppe Marchesi, according to Di Cristina. He also explained the growing importance of Salvatore Todo Rina and Bernardo Provenzano. In the meantime, Rina managed to have Badalamenti expelled from the commission by accusing him of having organized the assassination of Francesco Madogna, who was the boss of Vallelonga and an ally of the Corleonesi. Badalamenti was subsequently exiled from the mafia in Sicily altogether. His place was taken by Sicily godfather Michele the Pope Greco, who was also aligned with Rina. Michele Greco, like Callo, Marchesi, and Riccobono, kept his alliances secret from the likes of Bontade and Inzarillo. Di Cristina was murdered on May 30th, 1978 by the Corleonesi while waiting at a bus stop. His death was a prelude to the Second Mafia War. As for Giuseppe Greco, his first notable arrest would be in 1979 for bank robbery. His two accomplices, Pietro Marchesi and Giovanello Greco, would also be arrested. During the robbery, the night watchman would also be killed, complicating the case. However, being that the three defendants were all members of the mafia, it was not a surprise when all charges were dropped due to lack of evidence. The next major hit committed by Giuseppe Greco was the murder of Stefano Bontade. Bontade was part of a faction opposing Rina and Provenzano's Corleonesi takeover. Bontade had secretly plotted the murder of Salvatore Rina in an attempt to bring the situation under control. However, Rina was informed of this plot through secret ally Michele Greco. Giuseppe Greco would be given the contract to murder Stefano Bontade. On the evening of April 23, 1981, while driving home from his 42nd birthday party in Palermo, Bontade was killed at a red light while sitting in his Alfa Romeo. At 11:30 p.m., he was approached by a motorcycle driven by Giuseppe Lucchesi, with Giuseppe Greco riding pillion. Greco would shoot Bontade to death with an AK-47, leaving him unrecognizable. The violent takeover would continue when on May 11, 1981, Salvatore Inzerillo was shot to death after leaving his mistress's home in Palermo. As he was about to get into his armored Alfa Romeo Alfetta, Giuseppe Marchesi, Giuseppe Greco, Antonio Madogna, and Giuseppe Giacomo Gambino opened fire from a parked Renault van through the windshield, killing him in a hail of bullets. Prior to the murder, the hit team tested their AK-47s on a jewelry shop window to make sure the bullets could penetrate the armored glass windshield of the Alfa Romeo. During this time, Giuseppe Greco would become especially close to fellow mafioso and assassin Filippo Marchesi, who at that time was the boss of the Corso de Mille neighborhood in Palermo. The two would collaborate on a number of murders, allegedly even garroting a man, with Greco and Marchesi each holding one side of the rope. Giuseppe Greco was also believed to be responsible for a murder on Christmas Day in 1981, when he shot and killed Giovanni Di Peri, the boss of Villabate, along with two of his men as well as an innocent bystander. Giuseppe Greco and his squad of killers would be called on again just a few months later. This time the target was a communist politician named Pio La Torre. La Torre was one of the few politicians in the Italian Chamber of Deputies to propose serious anti-mafia legislation in Parliament, namely the Rognoni-La Torre law. For this reason, the Mafia Commission sentenced him to death. On April 30th, 1982, La Torre and his driver, Rosario De Salvo, were shot down in a hail of bullets near the Communist Party headquarters in Palermo. Their car was trapped in a one-way street blocked off by the hit team. De Salvo would return fire with his .38 caliber pistol before he himself was killed. The hit team was composed of Giuseppe Greco, Giuseppe Lucchesi, Nino Madogna, Mario Prestefilippo, and Salvatore Cucuzza. Another murder would take place a little more than a month later. This time the target would be Catania boss, Alfeo Ferlito. Ferlito was in a violent battle with Nito Santapaola over control of the Catania Mafia. As a favor to Santapaola, Salvatore Reina put out a contract on Ferlito's life. Around 10 a.m. on June 16, 1982, a Mercedes driven by Giuseppe De Lavore was transferring inmate Alfeo Ferlito along with his carabinieri escorts Silvano Franzolin, Salvatore Reti, and Luigi Di Barca from Ina to the Trapani jail. The car was traveling on Palermo Ring Road when it was approached by a BMW 520 and an Alfetta 2000, whose occupants opened fire with AK-47 automatic rifles and shotguns. The driver, Di Lavore, was killed instantly, causing the Mercedes to swerve, crossing into the opposite lane and violently colliding with a Fiat 500 that just happened to be passing by. Escort Chief Franzolin managed to get out of the car holding his pistol and attempted to return fire, but was instantly struck and killed. The killers then approached the Mercedes and riddled the remaining occupants with bullets before fleeing the scene. In the massacre, the killers shot so many rounds that the victims were almost unrecognizable. Giuseppe Greco is believed to be part of the hit team. Giuseppe Greco would again show how cold and callous he could be when at the end of the summer of 1982, Greco murdered his close friend, Filippo Marchesi, on the orders of Salvatore Toto Reina. The Mafia War was dying down, and Reina had decided Marchesi was no longer of any use. Greco and his squad were even dispatched to kill the brothers of another death squad member named Vincent Puccio. Puccio was even forced to participate to prove his loyalty to the Borgata. Then on November 30th, 1982, Greco personally strangled to death Palermo boss Rosario Ricobono, the longtime ruler of the Partana Mondello family. Both Ricobono and Noce boss Salvatore Scaglione had originally been close allies to Stefano Bontade and Salvatore Inzarillo, only to later betray them and kill a number of their own friends and associates on behalf of Rina when it became clear the Corleonesi were winning the war. However, when they had outlived their usefulness, Rina decided to have them eliminated. The Corleonesi invited Ricono, Scaglione, and 3 other men to a meeting in a country villa between San Giuseppe Giotto and Montereal. Shortly after their arrival, they were separated and massacred by Giuseppe Greco, Giovanni Brusca, and their team of killers. Following the massacre, many men loyal to both bosses were murdered in Palermo. 3 more of their associates were gunned down a few days later, and his brother Vito Riccobono was found decapitated in his car. Within a few days, Riccobono's entourage was eliminated. One of the few who survived was Riccobono's erstwhile driver, Salvatore Lo Piccolo, who rose to power 20 years later. By this time, Greco was believed to be the underboss of the Cicculi family and thus had an army of soldiers beneath him. However, rather than delegate murders to his underlings, he would often take part in them himself. On July 29, 1983, he and Nino Madogno parked a Fiat 126 loaded with explosives that would kill Magistrate Rocco Cinici, as well as Stefano Lasacci, the porter of the building in Via Pipatone, where Cinici lived. Giuseppe Greco would be sent to eliminate another problem for the Mafia when a contract was put out on the life of Antonino Nini Casara. Casara was a deputy chief of the judicial police in Palermo and a close associate of Giovanni Falcone and the anti-mafia pool of the Republic Prosecutor's Office of Palermo. Casara's investigations contributed to the groundwork of the first Maxi trial, which convicted hundreds of mafiosos. On August 6, 1985, he was returning home in his Alfa Romeo Alfetta with 2 agents as escorts. He exited the car and reached for the front door of his home when a group of 9 hitmen armed with AK-47 rifles and submachine guns opened fire from the windows of an apartment building. 23-year-old police officer Roberto Antocchia exited the car and while attempting to open the door for Casara was instantly struck by gunshots. The other police escort, Natali Mondo, remained unharmed, succeeding in taking cover under the car. Casara was hit as well and died inside the entrance of his home in the arms of his wife Laura, who witnessed the ambush with their daughter from the balcony of their home. It is believed that Giuseppe Greco and his death squad carried out the hit. After the assassination, his notebook, which was assumed to contain important information, mysteriously disappeared from his office. By the mid-1980s, Giuseppe Greco had become one of the most prominent of the new generation of mafiosos. He had distinguished himself in the Second Mafia War, and many soldiers reportedly acted like he was the boss of Cicculi, while the actual boss, Michele Greco, was in hiding. He had also built up a following of younger mafiosos who looked up to him even more so than they did their bosses in Corleone. Rina apparently felt the need to reduce the strength of the Cicculi family by eliminating its most prominent killers, starting with Giuseppe Greco. In order to weaken Greco's position, Rina ordered the massacre of Piazza Scaffa when 8 people were killed in the Cicculi Mandamento. The victims were gunned down with shotguns in a barn. Greco was not informed as part of a deliberate strategy to show his lack of effective power over the territory under his jurisdiction. Finally, in September of 1985, Greco invited 2 of his close friends and fellow mafiosos, Vincenzo Puccio and Giuseppe Lucchesi, to his villa outside of Bagheria, about 12 miles east of Palermo. It is alleged that once there, the pair would draw their weapons and shoot Giuseppe Greco multiple times in the head, killing him. His body was never found, and his death was not confirmed until 1989, when an informant named Francesco Marino Manoia, whose brother had also been in the Greco house at the time of the killing, indeed confirmed the murder. Giuseppe Greco was probably the most prolific killer of his era, which happened to be during one of the bloodiest periods in the history of Sicilian La Cosa Nostra. Giuseppe Greco is thought to be responsible for 80 deaths, although some students of Cosa Nostra history believe he could have committed more than 300 killings. In terms of ruthlessness, callousness, and precision, Giuseppe Greco had few peers. He will be remembered as one of organized crime's top hitmen.